I admit it. I am the world's best procrastinator. I'm not proud of it. Um, and I do apologize that it's been a year since the first episode. And if you haven't listened to that episode, it's really important that you do because this is going to be a consecutive set of episodes that tell a story. And I promise not to let a year go by until the third episode. But we left off with the accident. And that was the accident that brought me to the hospital and was the Valentine's Day motorcycle accident. You need to listen to that and it'll all make sense. But what I wanted to touch on now before we get to the actual coming home part was during that time in the hospital, and I was in there for quite a while. I left off by saying that I had felt that there was something not right. Couldn't put my finger on it, but when something's not right, you know it. One of the most obvious things was that I had lived a life that, for whatever reason, landed me in the hospital quite often. I've had over 40 surgeries due to multiple accidents. I've lived life pretty hard and fast. No regrets, but lots of injuries and surgeries and whatnot. And through each of those during that marriage, my wife was the most compassionate person that you could ask for a spouse in terms of sticking by my side. I'd come out of a surgery and there'd be balloons and cards and stuffed animals and all the things that make you feel real good about, your relationship. And, you're so appreciative that somebody loves you and cares about you when you're down. And in this particular case, the first thing I realized when I woke up was that nobody was there. That's the first thing. Here I just had a major surgery where I almost lost my leg, and whether or not I was ever going to walk normal again. But yeah, so nobody was there. And as the days went by, there were no cards, no flowers, no anything. And my wife would pop in, after work. She would pop in for maybe, 5 minutes max. Hey, I got to get going. I got something going on. Talk to you later. Love you. Bye. And each time, she was dressed up, nails done, hair done, which was kind of her thing. But it got to the point where I started feeling very self conscious because, you establish a relationship with the nursing staff when you're in the hospital for an extended stay. And I'm a talker. And so it wasn't long before everybody knew a few things about me. That, number one, that I had 3 kids, uh, twin boys and a daughter, and that I had this wonderful marriage and was in love with this woman. And, I told everybody that. I mean, even at the time when I was a cop, I'd arrest people, and by the time they got booked, they knew how much I loved my wife and my family. That's not always the smartest thing to do, but I've always been that way, right or wrong. So they all knew my story, and I started becoming a little bit self conscious, thinking, man, what must they think? There ain't nobody here. Nobody comes here. And when she does come, she comes and goes really quick. The maybe 3 times that she visited. And I mean, at one point, she showed up, and I had been laying on my back so long, I had developed bed sores on my back, which are super itchy. And, I was asking her to help me, and you could just see the irritation, which is something that I had never seen before. In 19 years, I had just never seen anything like this from her. So I knew things were getting bad. And so finally comes the day that I'm going to go home. And, through the insurance, we had a 2-story house. Our bedroom was upstairs, but they had turned the living room of my house into like a little hospital. They had put in a hospital bed and all these different gadgets because I was 100% non weight bearing and was going to be for a long time. And I was going to have in home therapy and blah, 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 blah. And so for the first time in our 19-year marriage, we were sleeping separately. I was sleeping downstairs and she was upstairs, and that was heartbreaking for me. And at the time, I thought it was probably hard on her. How wrong I was. But, I could tell that, she was absolutely disinterested in my situation. And had that been normal, it would have been, nothing unusual, but it was the complete opposite of what I'd experienced in my 19 years. Let me back up a little bit to before the accident, too, because this will be kind of important. My wife was at what I thought was a very good wife in terms of being married to a cop, because that comes with a lot of challenges that most people are aware of. The hours suck, working on holidays, of course, the threat of getting killed, blah, blah, blah. Back up to before the accident. So during the years of my LAPD career, my wife she was a good participant in terms of she was interested in what I did, and she went on many ride-alongs. I included her in all of our social activity in terms of day off parties that we would go to, Super Bowl parties, police fishing trips. I mean, there were many all-night fishing trips, deep sea fishing trips, where it was all cops and her. She would be the only female on the boat because I took her everywhere and included her in everything. I always wanted to make sure that she was a part of my experience, as much as I could. And I didn't want her to think that I was out running around on her. So she could see and experience what I experienced. Being a mother of three is a tough thing, under any circumstances. And, at some point, she became very dissatisfied with her own life. And I mean, we used to talk a lot. Obviously, I'm a talker, and her and I communicated a lot during that marriage. And she made it very clear to me that she was feeling very dissatisfied and, quite frankly, a bit jealous. For whatever reason, I was that one cop that there could be 100 cops there. If there was a news crew there, they would gravitate toward me. Maybe it was because I was tall and stood out. I don't know. But I would invariably, if there was a news story in the division I was working in, I'd be the guy that they would want to interview. So we had a little routine. I always save everything, and anyone that knows me knows that I save videos and pictures. And I did it back then with the thought that my children someday would want to see what life was like for their father, when he was young and was out working in the streets. And, I'm just that way. So we all always kept a blank VHS tape in the VCR, and sometimes I would call her and say, "Hey, check out channel whatever," and she'd hit record. And so we ended up with many videotapes of me being interviewed about this, or this celebrity thing happened when I was working in Hollywood, or this shootout occurred. I got a lot of work done as a cop, and subsequently was awarded many different citations and awards from the police department and even various community groups, for my partner and my efforts, to combat crime. And of course, my wife would attend these award ceremonies with me. And she confided to me once, that more than once, that she felt that she wanted to leave her footprints in society and wanted to be recognized for doing something other than just being, a mother. I can understand that. I understood it too. I understood it back then as well. But what she came up with was she suddenly said she was interested in becoming a firefighter. She wanted to, help people and experience some of the adrenaline stuff that I did. I mean, she did everything with me. I jumped out of airplanes in the Army, and when I got out, we took up skydiving, and she, of course, was right there with me. And, whatever I did, she did. Whatever I did, we did. We did it together. So at some point, she had made the decision that firefighting would be good for her. And I'm a pretty straightforward guy, and I speak, from the heart. And I remember, and this was probably not the best way to present it, but, my wife was 5'2", and, I'm 6'4", and I think I was probably pushing about 280 at that time. And I just laid on the floor and I said, "Listen, move me from this room to that room. I just want to see if you can do it." And of course, she couldn't move me 6 inches. There's just no way. And I told her, I said, "Look, this is not to offend you, but honestly, I think that citizens have a right when they dial 911 to have somebody respond that's capable of performing the operation, and if you can't move somebody, drag them from a burning room into a non-burning room, maybe firefighting's not for you." And of course, that went over like a turd in the punch bowl. She didn't like that. And, so ultimately I capitulated and even sat down with her on the internet and researched classes that she could take. I mean, what am I going to do? I'm not going to tell her, "No, you can't be a firefighter." I gave her my opinions, and they didn't matter to her, and she wanted to do it. So I supported it to the extent that I helped her select some courses that were being offered in one of the local community colleges. I think it was called Fire Science or something like that. And so she enrolls into this just before the accident, and she's going to these courses. And I ask about, like I do with my wife now, hey, how was your day? What happened? Tell me what's going on. And so she had described to me that the instructor was this older guy and really nice dude, blah blah blah. You can probably see where this is going. So, anyways, she started attending those classes, and then of course the accident happened, and now I'm completely shattered. And so the other thing I'd like to mention too is that during, just to paint a clear picture of sort of the relationship, and from my perspective, I'm sure if you talk to her, she's going to tell you something completely different. But I always was aware that being a police officer was risky in terms of potential divorce. I mean, cops that I worked with from day one, you got to be where you didn't ask cops if they were married. You asked them how many times they'd been married, because it just seemed like all of them or most of them had gone through divorces. And it was almost always based on infidelity. I would sit in the car and cops talk about everything under the sun when they're sitting in a police car for 8 to 12 hours. And I had heard, these horror stories of cops that were in love with their wives, and they went to work, and for whatever reason they had too many people, or the guy got sick, and he would go home unannounced. We didn't have cell phones in those days. And and walk in the door, and there's his wife banging, the neighbor or the fucking gardener or the car repair guy or even their partner sometimes. I'd heard this so many times, and it really concerned me. And I also was aware of the fact that her and I got married young, and people get bored with people. How could you not? I mean, 19 years is a long time to be with somebody. So I made it a habit, at least 2 or 3 times a year, where I'd sit her down and say, hey, be honest with me. You know what I'm going to ask you, but I really want you to be honest with me. Are you getting bored with this relationship? And if you are, let me know so that we can work to change things, and spice things up, or make whatever changes are necessary so that you don't get bored. I know that you've been with me for a long time. I married her when she was 18. I was 21, and she would always assure me. And it's important to know that she spent 19 years lavishing me with praise and plaques on the walls of what a great husband I am, and what a great father. And I mean, so if I was going off of just what she said and what she presented, I would have clearly thought that I was the best husband that ever walked the face of the earth. That should have been a red flag, but I was young, and I've learned a lot, obviously, since then. Let's get back to, so now I'm at home, and I'm in the downstairs, hospital bed. It felt so bad being separate. I'm used to sleeping with my wife. So at one point, I took great risks and crawled up those stairs. And I mean, that sounds easier than it was, because Annie, if a butterfly landed on my leg, it would have just unraveled all of this, the surgery, all of the work that was done. My leg was swollen to the size of my thigh all the way down to my ankle, and was so blue that it was black. I mean, it was very, very nasty looking. But I sat on my ass, and I backed up the stairs, one stair at a time, and managed to get myself somehow into that bed so that I could spend the night with my wife. The next morning, that's pretty much when the red flags got too red to ignore. It was about 4:30 in the morning, and I wake up, and she's in the, you can look right from the bedroom into the walk-in closet that was through the bathroom, and she was getting all her stuff put into a gym bag, and she was dressed up, and makeup was looking good, and she was just looking, beautiful. I asked her, I said, hey, where are you going, so early? And she said, oh, I'm going to the gym. It just didn't feel right. You just know when shit's wrong. And I don't, to this day, I don't know why this came out of my mouth, but this is what came out of my mouth. I said, hey, let me ask you something. Are you seeing this instructor dude at the college? And her exact quote was, give me a break. The guy's 12 years older than me. He's an old man. Boy, did I catch it right. But, that was that. And so life goes on, and sleeping in bed was not an option because it was just too dangerous for me. So I ended up back downstairs in the hospital bed there. The kids at the time were pretty much GOA. Having talked to them throughout the years and understanding, I mean, I get it. They knew that things were falling apart. They could feel it in the air because after her going to the gym, supposedly at 4:30 in the morning thing, I started really questioning her, and the tension was rising. And so the kids were pretty much spending the night at their friend's house. It just seemed like there was nobody in the house. They would come and go, get things, and leave, and that would be it. Well, I now that I see now that it was wrong, but I had for 19 years let my wife handle everything. She handled all the banking, she paid all the bills, she did everything. I never opened any mail. It was just not something I did. I went to work, I earned the money, and I came home, and she worked, did various jobs here and there, but obviously it was me that was keeping us afloat. I see it now as putting a burden on her. I probably should not have let her have to run everything. But that's what I did. And so subsequently, I had no clue how to check anything, but in terms of I didn't have bills, I didn't have anything. I didn't have any cell phone bills. Everything was, who knows where it was. So I went through this big thing where I called the cell phone company, and I asked for a copy of, the bill. And it was in her name, I think. There was some reason they couldn't send it to me, and I ended up having to make some I lied and said, look, one of my kids ran away, and this is life or death, and if you don't send me that bill to me in my name, like right now, there's going to be some legal action if something happens to those kids, because I need the phone bills to track and figure out where they're at, or where the kid is at. Whatever the case, they ended up sending it to me. And here I am, like a little, detective. I'm going through this multi-page phone bill, and I got a highlighter, and it all falls right into place. I mean, there's literally hundreds of calls to one number. I check the number. It's easy to do, and it comes right back to the instructor at the college, the fire dude, who was a firefighter in Burbank. These are like at all hours of the night, and some of these calls are like 5 seconds. Some of these calls are hours and hours. And I start looking back on when I was in the hospital. Yeah, it was very clear that this is what was going on. My wife during those days would transport me in our SUV, which was super hard for me to get into. I'd have to sit sideways across the back seat or whatever. She would take me to physical therapy because I'd gotten to the point now where I was going to physical therapy. I had a envelope that I put together. I had printed out a picture of this dude's face. I had phone records, I had all this shit in this envelope. And as we were driving there toward the physical therapy, I told her, I said, hey, can you pull over for a second? And she goes, oh, no, we got to get you going. We got to get you there because you're going to be late. I said, no, please just pull over. I got something I want to run by you. Michael, we can't, she didn't want to pull over. But I said, listen, this is super important. And I'm seriously, I'm begging you, stop the car so that I can ask you something. And obviously she knew where I was going with this. And I just confronted her. I said, hey, look, I think this is exactly what I said. I said, listen, you have something that you need to tell me. And it's something that I already know, but I want to hear it come from your mouth. And she said, I have no idea what you're talking about. And I said, listen, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Have a little bit of self-respect and tell me so that I don't have to tell you, because I'm going to tell you in a few seconds if you don't say anything. I just want to hear you admit it. And she says, no, I don't know what's going on in your head, but there ain't nothing happening here. So I held up this manila envelope and I said, so you're telling me that I just basically wasted $500 that we don't have, and I'm making all this shit up, on a private investigator, and that the pictures that are in this envelope and the report that's in this envelope and the videotape that's on the way that he's producing now, all of that is just bullshit. You're telling me that you haven't been going over to this dude's house? And I named the guy's name, was Kelly. And she goes, oh, okay, yeah, so I go to his house. Big deal. I go to his house from time to time, because we're talking about classes and work, school work or whatever. And at that moment, it just confirmed to me that my marriage was over. But I was like sick to my stomach, but I still kept a poker face. And I said, you're just going to the house. That's it. Nothing else going on. She said, absolutely nothing going on. I said, so the videotape that was described to me that's coming of you kissing this guy and going out to dinners and lunches with this guy in restaurants, and you showing up at his house at all hours, none of that is true. And she just turns around, looks at me, and goes, "Ooh, congratulations, you're a great detective." And yeah, at that moment, I knew that life as I knew it and the life that I had pretended was so beautiful was over, because that was pretty much confirmation that, the marriage was over, in my opinion. Now, you would think that that'd be pretty cut and dried going forward. I mean, I had always told her, that we never were ever allowed to say the word divorce in our marriage. But I had made clear that the only reason I would ever divorce her would be if she was unfaithful to me, because that would be such a betrayal, given everything that we had done in our lives and accomplished and talked about and blah, blah, blah. I was not really true to myself, even though I knew what was going on. The thought of what I thought was my beautiful family with my three awesome children and this whole life that I had always fantasized about when I was growing up, coming from such a shitty childhood and then suddenly having this beautiful children and a beautiful home and a beautiful wife, and everybody was just envious of this marriage. How do you guys do it? And I just could not even conceive of a thought of not having that. Of now I'm old and broken and probably crippled for life, and I just couldn't imagine life without that family. I went into this, surprised myself, where I ended up allowing for a second chance. I'm ashamed of it now, but I was begging her to, please keep the family together. Don't do this. And, at one point she said, "Oh, well, maybe I'm going through a midlife crisis." And I kind of held on to that. And I thought, good, maybe that, I had her promise me, we talked for hours about, what this was going to do to the kids and how, this is going to destroy our whole family. And, I'll make whatever changes that you need me to make, but please, you have to vow to me that you're not going to see this guy again. And she very quickly promised me that she wouldn't see him again. And I was at the point where I would believe a blatant lie even when I knew it was a lie, because to not believe it would mean I'd have to take action, and the action would be the destruction of the family, and I just couldn't even conceive of it. There's missions in California, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, and they run all up and down the coast. We're old missions, and each one is different, and there's one near San Clemente, California, which is kind of on the way to San Diego, and it's right on the ocean, and it's called San Juan Capistrano. And if you haven't been there, you could Google it and look at the old church they have in there. They have this old church that, my wife and I had been to. It was a favorite place of my father's. He's the one that showed it to me. But it had a very magical spiritual feeling when you walked, because it had been there for over 100 years, hundreds of years, and so many people had prayed there back during the time of when the Indians were in the area, and the missions were there, of course, to settle the area and convert the Indians and all this other crap. But it had such a history, a spiritual history behind it, that when you walked in, I used to say that a blind person could walk in and know right away they were somewhere special. I mean, just the feeling of it was phenomenal. In absolute pathetic desperation, I had my ex drive her and I, all the way south. It was probably about an hour or so down to San Juan Capistrano, and with a walker. I was a walker, or no, it was crutches. Hobbled in to this place, and we sat in the front pew. There was only one other dude. Some old guy was behind, a few pews behind us, and here we were all to ourselves. And I had her, her and I both. We held hands, and I prayed out loud to God to strengthen our marriage and to wash away any negativity, and please allow us to go on and be happy and learn from our mistakes and blah blah blah. And of course, I'm crying, and she had tears in her eyes, and this old guy, he couldn't hear what we were saying, but at one point he comes walking up and he puts his hand on my shoulder. "Hey, I see you guys are going through some hard times, and I just want you to know I'm praying for you." And it was a big deal for me. And we drove all the way back home, and it wasn't 2 days later that she was gone again, and was sitting on the couch with my leg elevated. It was not like I could just get up and walk across the room. She came home from work, went upstairs, was getting her bags packed and getting her makeup on and whatnot. And I'll never forget it, because it was this was it's even hard to even talk about, because this was not the woman that I married. Now, if she was here, she would say, "Yeah, I wasn't the doormat, the immature young girl who was ignorant and didn't, because how that goes. You'll hear this later, that yeah, her version of this whole thing is much different than mine. I was an abusive monster, and she escaped this and went on to become a life coach. Believe that, but or not. But yeah, I'm sitting there and I'm literally yelling upstairs, "Hey, please don't do this. Where are you going? We need to talk." I knew where she was going, and she didn't say anything. But when she came downstairs with her overnight bag, and I was literally in tears, crying, "Please don't leave me," she holds up her car keys and shakes them and says, "Bye bye," and she walked out the door, and I didn't see her for 2 more days. This was what I was going through, and I'm sitting there literally unable to get up and get a cup of coffee, go to the bathroom without somebody helping me. And of course, nobody's home. The kids are gone. So I had literally friends of mine that would come over and help me get into the bathroom and wait, and then help me get back to the. It was a fucking nightmare. But on top of it, I had to accept the fact that my life as I knew it and the life that the kids knew was never going to be back. It was gone for good. And so I think I'll end it here, because last time I think I made it too long. In the next episode, which you're not going to have to wait a year, I'm going to go into sort of the ugly part of the separation and the divorce that followed. And like I said, if you're hopefully you've watched the first video, but the whole point of this podcast series is not to cry about how I was screwed over by this woman. As I might have said in the in the first podcast, I'm taking you down a horrendously dark path that I ended up on, and that all of us that were involved ended up on. But at the end of it is the gold, and the whole point of this is hopefully this reaches people that are going through similar, or maybe not so dramatic, challenges. But the idea here, and I'll repeat this throughout these series, or the series, the idea is that no matter how bad things get, and let me tell you something, in the next episode, you're going to see just how bad they get, because I'm not going to hold back. I'm going to tell you, I'm going to admit some things. But the point is that no matter how hopeless you feel and how ugly things get, you got to stick around, because you just don't know what's waiting on the other side of that bloody battle. You just don't know until you fight your way through it and get to the other side. And I'm going to end it here, and thank you for listening, and don't give up on me. If you like this podcast, share the podcast, but please share it from the beginning so that it makes sense. And in the meantime, I hope everybody's well, safe, and healthy, and I'll talk to you next time.